Diamond P Sports presents the fastest sport on wheels, championship drag racing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another CompetitionPlus.com audio magazine feature. I'm Joe Castello, and today we get to speak with one of the true legends of NHRA drag racing and broadcasting, Big Mac Dave Mcclelland. Dave, how are you doing today?
Thank you very much, Joe. Now, that intro brings back some very fond memories of a lot of years.
Oh, I can only imagine what it was like to actually been doing it. It brings back memories for me, having just watched the programs you guys put together.
Well, thank you for that. It was a good run, as they say in the biz. I actually spent 27 years doing the TV shows for NHRA, and that whole Diamond P era was one that's very fondly remembered, not only by me, but lots of other folks as well.
Well, I can tell you, as someone who has been now for a much shorter amount of time, but involved in drag racing, and that's what hooked me. That's what bridged the gap between the stories that my father told actually coming up, and then having something to put it all together was Diamond P Sports and American Sports Cavalcade.
Are you blaming me for all of that?
All your fault.
It's all my fault. Well, I'll very proudly take credit for that, I guess. But as I said, it was an interesting run. I had the very good fortune of getting in on the ground floor of consistent drag racing coverage. I started, the first couple of shows were like in 1970 and 71 and 72. One at Dallas at the Spring Nationals. I was involved in that one. And then the next year at the Super Nationals out at Ontario. Another live show. And after those two attempts at live programming, it was pretty much determined that under the structure of the event at that time, it's very difficult to do because there are too many variables that dictate making it tough for a live show with a limited time frame. So that's what led to the post-produced shows that you watched from 1973 on that seemed to be the most workable and the easiest way of going about it. They've streamlined it considerably since I stepped out of the picture at the end of the 2000 season. The travel was beginning to catch up with me, and the fact that they were putting all 24 races at the time on ESPN, I just didn't want to travel that much anymore, so I just graciously said, take me out of the picture, folks, and that then led a few years later to taking myself out of the picture of the announcing scene.
Well, it's still a problem for drag racing to this day, not being able to have a live package, but the tape delay has been working pretty well. We fans, though, we're annoyed because Little League Baseball sometimes knocks us off, but other than that, the package is good.
Well, that's going to be a problem you face no matter what when you have a post-produced show. It's going to be the one that gets bounced around, and it really doesn't matter. You watch, and in a lot of cases, let's say a Major League Baseball game goes over or whatever, they'll continue with that. But it's all dictated by the money generated, and probably there are a number of programs that do a little bit better in that revenue generation world than does the sport of drag racing.
No, makes sense. What we want to have you on today for, Dave, though, is to look back a little bit into your career. Of course, it is the so-called off-season, gives us a little time to delve into some of the great personalities of the sport, you, of course, being one of them. And you mentioned that you got in on the ground floor, but what I find interesting is not only did you get in on the ground floor, but you were one of the best. How can that happen at the same time? The luck, the circumstance, and oh, by the way, this guy turns out to be one of the true legends of motorsports broadcasting.
Well, trust me, when I first went to a drag race in 1955, that was about the furthest thing from my mind of being a legend or anything. I had been going, I was born and raised in the Kansas City, Missouri area, and had spent a good bit of time in my younger years, I'm talking about the teenage years, at oval tracks. I was into racing long before drag racing came along, but they built that new racetrack in Kansas City that opened in 1955 with an original drag safari meet. Those were the four guys that went around the country, the Chick Cannons and the group that traveled, Bud Evans and all, that traveled around the country presenting drag racing in its very earliest stages. And I was fortunate enough to attend the opening race at the Kansas City track that was one of those races. Well, I thought, this is kind of cool. You know, you can get up close to the people, and it's something that you can envision doing yourself that sometimes was a stretch at the oval track. I never considered myself an oval track racer in any way, and a very limited skilled drag racer. But even so, it was something that I really was attracted to, so I started going to more races. That led to being on site in 1959 in Carlisle, Arkansas, at an airport racetrack with my friends from Shreve Automotive in Shreveport, Louisiana. I was working in radio and TV in that town at the time, and I had the opportunity to announce a match race between Don Garlitz and Eddie Hill. Well, that was another one of those momentous occasions in my life, because I said, wow, this announcing thing is kind of cool. I wonder if I can find more work. So there was no pay. You have to understand that this was all done because you love doing it. I started noodling around and picked up more work, and by 1963 or 4, I was announcing someplace in the country practically every weekend from about the 1st of April until the end of October. I had the opportunity to join the announcing staff at the national event level in 1961 when they took the Nationals to Indy, and I continued to do that until I stepped back at the end of the 2003-2004 season. So that's about a 43-year run doing that, and a 27-year run doing their television shows. That's not a bad gig, I guess.
Did your style change from the first time you did some drag racing announcing, and did you find it difficult to go from being a radio and television newsman to basically doing live play-by-play of a sporting event?
I didn't notice a great deal of difficulty in the transition. I had always been fairly proficient, shall we say, at ad-libbing and describing things. Had a moderately good vocabulary and the skills of putting words together without having written copy. So it really didn't have that much of a transition problem. What I have noticed over the years, and I've still got some old tapes of me not only in the broadcasting business doing the news, as you said, and some race announcing tapes, just listen to some of the Diamond P stuff, that the style has changed, but so has the commodity in some regards. So you just sort of go with the flow, and you adapt to it as it goes along. I still say that anybody that can do that for 43 years and walk out with a whole skin, and most folks saying you did a good job, now I can't think of a much better run than that.
Absolutely not. It's impossible in the entertainment industry these days, and you had yourself such a great career. But what's surprising to me, Dave, is that while you're most known for your voice and your broadcasting of NHRA races and motorsports, you were doing a lot behind the scenes, just having a regular job. You were a promotions person at NHRA, promotion and PR. You invented the Super Chevy show while you were at Argus. You were a sales rep. There's a perfect job for a broadcaster to hate, as a sales rep. And you've done a lot of different things.
Well, it's been a very interesting life. I went away from high school. I graduated from high school in 1954 in Liberty, Missouri. And I went to college the first year at a small school in Missouri on a football scholarship with all intents and purposes of being a football coach. Well, about 6 weeks into it, I said, this isn't quite what I thought it would be. So I got to noodling around at the various courses being offered at the school, and up popped one of radio and television production. And it really was an experimental course. It had never been offered before, and I don't know whether they continued after I took it that very first time. But to give you an idea how limited it was, they had a wire recorder. Now, most folks don't even know what a wire recorder was, as opposed to tape. You could record onto a microfine wire, and it was on a spool, and it would run through just like tape would, but it was a wire. Obviously, very difficult to edit because it couldn't put the wire back together again if it ever broke. They had that machine to record your voice. They had a wooden tripod with wheels that had a cardboard box mounted on it that was a dummy television camera, and they had a workbook. That was the extent of the equipment. But I took this course, and I came to the realization that somebody would pay me money just to sit and talk. So I thought, hey, maybe this would be a good gig. I went back home, told my folks that I wanted to change schools and find some place that had radio and television. This is 1955. Very limited, because the television business was just really starting to grow exponentially, as it has done since that time. And with that, it was difficult to find a place. At that time, there were two major schools in the Midwest, the Northwestern up at Evanston, Illinois, and Iowa State at Ames, Iowa. Well, my dad couldn't afford Northwestern's tuition rates, but we were able to scrape enough together to get me up to Iowa State. I went up there obviously to get a degree. Well, turns out that Iowa State, this is bad research on my part, that Iowa State is an agricultural and engineering school, and you had to have all kinds of math and science classes to be able to get a degree. Well, I didn't like either one of those courses. What I wanted was radio and TV. So I concentrated on doing that. I think you'd probably call it auditing today. But with no intent on a degree, just to gain the knowledge and the expertise to be able to find that first job. And after 2 years, approximately, the head of the department came to me and he says, go out and get a job. He said, we have nothing left for you to do. So with that, I did. I started as a studio cameraman in 1956 in Little Rock, Arkansas. The only reason for Little Rock is my folks lived there, and I could live at home. So that lasted about 6 months. I wanted to be an announcer. I took off in my car heading south, stopping in every town and cold calling on radio stations looking for a job as an announcer. I found one in Shreveport, Louisiana, spent 13 years in the broadcasting business there, got married there, and from that point I built on that and the racing business until 1985 I went to work for myself. So from the time I started in 1959 to 1985, I held down a full-time job while I did all that other stuff.